All right, everybody, welcome back. Are you ready to dive into some ancient history today?
I am. Let's do it.
Okay, excellent. I'm excited. Today, we are going to be looking at ancient Rome, but forget the gladiators and the emperors for just a second.
Right.
We're going deep into your Chapter 5 notes in this deep dive. Trust me, Roman life was way more relatable than you might think at first glance.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Roman society, it was incredibly advanced for its time. And what's really amazing is we have more than just, dusty old textbooks to go on.
Right.
We have Pompeii and Herculaneum.
Oh, yeah.
These cities, they were literally frozen in time by the eruption of Vesuvius. And they give us this almost eerie peek into their daily routines. It's like taking a snapshot of the past.
It's like a time capsule.
Exactly.
That's incredible. Okay, so picture this, okay? Rome. It's a bustling city, right? 1 million people.
1 million people.
Yeah. That's like today's Dublin.
Yeah.
Okay. Now they have their social hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
You got your patricians at the top, then your plebeians kind of in the middle, and then your slaves.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that rigid structure, there was some, I don't know, like some wiggle room, it seems like.
Yeah, it wasn't completely static. Like you said, you had the patricians, those elites born into power and wealth. But the plebeians, the everyday Romans, they actually had some rights to opportunities. They could own property. They had some legal protections. And, some of them, they even climbed the social ladder. It wasn't easy, of course, but it shows that it wasn't just about who your parents were. You could, with some luck and skill, improve your station.
That's pretty cool. And I think this is where it really gets fascinating for me. Because we hear Rome, we think emperors, we think gladiators, we think those big spectacles. But the majority of Romans, they were just like us. They were just trying to make a living, right?
Right.
They were going about their day just like we do. So you've got your senators arguing politics.
Of course.
You got your doctors trying to figure out medicine, which who knows what they were doing back then, but they were trying.
They had their theories.
And then you have your craftspeople creating those absolutely incredible mosaics.
Oh, those mosaics. I mean, they weren't just laborers, A skilled mosaicist, they could become quite wealthy, even patrons of the arts themselves. And their work, it wasn't just some niche thing. You found mosaics everywhere, decorating the homes of the wealthy, public spaces, even the baths. It just shows how much emphasis Romans placed on beauty, on art, in their everyday lives.
It's interesting, yeah, it's like those little details that really bring the past to life. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, they cared about their homes looking nice.
Exactly. Just like we do today.
Yeah, exactly. But we do have to acknowledge the hard parts, right?
Oh,
we
yeah.
can't gloss over that. And one of those really difficult aspects of Roman society was slavery. It was a fact of life back then.
Unfortunately, yes.
But what I find interesting is how people became enslaved in the first place. Obviously you have prisoners of war, that's kind of a given, right? But you also had people who fell into debt. That's a stark reminder that some things haven't really changed all that much over the centuries,
And, it's important to remember that not all slavery was the same. We have this image, this very brutal image in our minds, and certainly for those enslaved in mines or on those massive agricultural estates, the conditions were horrendous. But for others, particularly those who were educated, they could find themselves in roles like teachers, scribes, even managing the finances for wealthy households.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine having a gladiator as a tutor for your kids? Maybe not ideal.
That's a history lesson that'll keep you on your toes.
Right. But you get the point.
I do. Okay, but this is what blew my mind when I was reading through this. Manumission.
Yes.
They had this whole ceremony to free a slave.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. Imagine this, okay? Someone touches you with a Vindicta stick.
A Vindicta stick.
You get this cap of liberty placed on your head, and boom, you're free. It's where we get the word vindication from.
Isn't that fascinating?
Okay, yeah.
It shows just how deeply intertwined Roman legal concepts are with our own language. And it's important to note, manumission, it wasn't just symbolic. Freed slaves, they could become Roman citizens themselves. Right. It's another example of that potential for social mobility, at least for some, in Roman society.
Okay, are you ready for this? Imagine living in a high-rise apartment building.
Okay.
2,000 years ago. This was insula life for many Romans.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Forget your fancy elevators, though. Imagine hauling your groceries up several flights of stairs every single day. That was your workout.
Yeah, no kidding.
And the sanitation situation in some of those buildings. Let's just say I'm very, very grateful for modern plumbing.
It definitely puts those luxurious Roman villas, the domus, into perspective, doesn't it? Instead of a cramped apartment, imagine a spacious home built around a central courtyard, the atrium, open to the sky, collecting rainwater, creating this cool, refreshing space. And then you have the peristyle, a private garden with fountains, sculptures, maybe even a little reflecting pool. It was the Roman dream home.
Yeah, sign me up for the domus, not the insula. But still, it's pretty amazing to think that even back then they had apartment living. They were dealing with urban sprawl just like we are today.
Right. Rome was booming. They needed a way to house all those people. The insulae, they may not have been glamorous, but they were a practical solution to a problem that we still face today. How do you house a large population in a limited space?
But hey, it wasn't all just work and cramped apartments. Even those insula dwellers, they needed to unwind, right?
Of course. Everyone needs a break.
Exactly. So
Okay.
picture this, okay? It's market day at the Roman Forum.
Ah, the Forum.
Every 8 days, this place would just come alive. I mean, imagine a mix of a farmer's market, a shopping mall, and like a town square all roll into one.
And it wasn't just about buying your vegetables for the week. This is where deals were made, news was spread, gossip was exchanged. It was the Roman version of social media, really.
Yeah.
Just a cacophony of activity.
And you know who really had it made? The kids.
Oh, how so?
They got a day off from school.
No school. Just for market day.
Yeah. No lessons, just wandering around all those stalls, trying different foods, maybe even catching a glimpse of some important senator. Talk about kids' dream come true.
It really captures that vibrancy of daily life, doesn't it? That blending of commerce, politics, social interaction, all happening against the backdrop of those impressive temples and government buildings.
Speaking of impressive, those togas
Right?
always make a statement. But let's be real, they look a little impractical for everyday wear.
A little bit, yeah.
Thankfully, the Romans had the tunic. Think of it like their version of jeans and a t-shirt, perfect for everything from a quick trip to the Forum to, well, maybe not a gladiator match.
Yeah, you're right. The toga, that was more of a status symbol reserved for citizens and formal occasions. The tunic, that was the workhorse of Roman fashion.
Yeah.
Simple, adaptable, and probably a lot more comfortable.
Way more comfortable. Speaking of comfort, those Romans, they were onto something with their eating habits.
What do you mean?
My notes here say they were all about light meals during the day and then this big feast in the evening. It's like they invented intermittent fasting centuries ahead of the trend.
It's true, their eating patterns were quite different from ours. A small breakfast, maybe some bread and fruit, a quick lunch, and then the cena, the main meal of the day, enjoyed with family and friends. And for those who could afford it, the cena was a lavish affair.
Oh yeah, we're talking stuffed olives, oysters. I even saw ostrich on the menu.
Only the best for the Roman elite.
Okay, maybe I'd pass on the ostrich, but it's fascinating to see how food, even back then, it wasn't just about, not starving. It was about culture, status, enjoying the finer things.
Absolutely. And what better way to work up an appetite for a lavish feast than with some good old-fashioned entertainment?
Right. And when it comes to Roman entertainment, you can't get more iconic than the chariot races at the Circus Maximus.
It was the event of the year.
Oh, man, just imagine it. The roar of the crowd, the thunder of those hooves as the chariots are racing around the track. I always picture that scene from Ben-Hur, Chariots neck and neck, dust flying everywhere. It must have been incredible to witness firsthand.
The Circus Maximus was a marvel of engineering. It could hold hundreds of thousands of spectators. And you're right, it wasn't just a race, it was a spectacle, a huge social event. And of course there was the betting. People would win and lose fortunes on those races.
So basically the Roman Super Bowl, but with, maybe a little less padding.
And a lot more danger.
That's true. And speaking of high-stakes entertainment, we can't forget about the Colosseum and those legendary gladiators.
Yes, the gladiators. No discussion of Roman entertainment would be complete without them.
Right. The Colosseum, this massive amphitheater, it could hold, like 50,000 people? It wasn't just an arena. It was a symbol of Roman power, a stage for these thrilling, although often brutal, contests.
It's hard to imagine the sheer scale of it all.
I know. I've always been kind of fascinated by gladiators, these warriors fighting for their lives, fighting for their freedom in front of this massive crowd.
It was a spectacle unlike any other.
Although, I gotta say, I'm glad we've moved on to slightly less violent forms of entertainment these days.
As entertaining as they might be, I think we can all agree on that.
Right. But even the Romans, they knew how to unwind after a day at the Colosseum or the Circus Maximus.
They did. How so?
The baths.
Ah, the famous Roman baths.
We're talking the works, okay? Hot pools, cold pools, lukewarm pools, saunas, massage rooms. They even had libraries. It's like they combined a spa, a gym, and a community center all into one. Talk about a one-stop shop for relaxation.
It really highlights how important that social aspect was to Roman life. The baths weren't just about hygiene. They were a place to meet with friends, discuss business, escape the city for a bit.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. But okay, here's my question. What about soap? Did they at least have soap back then?
Well, they had the strigil.
The strigil? What in the world is a strigil?
It was a curved metal tool.
A metal tool?
Yeah, and they would use it to scrape dirt and oil off their skin.
Wait, hold on. Instead of soap, they just scrape themselves with this metal tool.
It was surprisingly effective, and believe me, considering the alternatives, like abrasive pastes made from things like crushed shells or sand, the strigil was probably a welcome alternative.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to choose to believe you on that one. I'm all for trying new things, but something about scraping myself with a metal tool just doesn't exactly scream spa day to me.
I can understand that. Maybe it's an acquired taste.
All right, metal scraping aside, let's dive into something a bit deeper. Let's talk about Roman religion. Now, from what I've read, it seems like these guys, they weren't exactly, worshiping at the altar of minimalism, were they?
Not quite. The Romans were very much the more the merrier when it came to the gods. They were polytheistic, meaning they believed in a whole bunch of different deities, each with their own specific area of expertise, you could say.
Oh, yeah.
You had Jupiter, the king of the gods, Mars, the god of war, Venus, the goddess of love.
It's a lot to keep track of.
Imagine trying to keep track of all those holidays.
I can barely keep track of my appointments, let alone an entire pantheon of gods. But I guess it makes sense. Their lives were full of uncertainty, right? I mean, a few extra gods on your side probably felt pretty reassuring.
I can see that.
And speaking of keeping things in order, our notes mention something about household shrines. Was that like their version of a good luck charm or something?
You could say that. It was very common for Roman families to have these little shrines set up in their homes, dedicated to their favorite gods, usually the ones connected to the family business or their own personal beliefs. It's kind of like having a patron saint watching over you, but Roman style.
A little extra divine intervention never hurts. But what's interesting to me? It's like this blend of personal belief and this like very public display of religion. It's something we still see today, in a way, how different cultures, they blend those ancient traditions with modern life. But speaking of blending the old and the new, let's talk about Roman funerals.
What?
Especially for the wealthy. It seems like they really knew how to put on a show, even in death.
Oh, absolutely. For the wealthy elite, death was really just one last opportunity for a grand display. Imagine this. There's this massive procession winding its way through the city streets.
Oh, wow.
Musicians, professional mourners, they even hired people to cry and wail dramatically. Talk about going out with a bang.
They really knew how to make an exit. But what about everyone else? I mean, not everyone could afford to hire a whole parade to see them off.
That's true. For the average Roman, funerals were much simpler affairs. But there were some things that transcended social class. For example, they would put a coin in the mouth of the deceased.
Why a coin?
It was meant as payment for Charon, the ferryman who would row their soul across the river Styx to the underworld.
Wow, so even back then, people were worried about having the correct change for the afterlife. Some things never change, do they? And speaking of timeless concerns, we can't talk about ancient Rome without mentioning their legendary army.
Ah, yes, the backbone of the Roman Empire. The force that carved out their vast dominion. These guys, they were the epitome of discipline and military might. But they weren't just about brute strength.
Right.
The Romans, they were masters of logistics and strategy. Their network of roads, forts, supply lines, it was light years ahead of its time.
And those roads, they weren't just for marching, were they? They connected the empire, allowed for trade, for communication, for the spread of ideas. It's incredible how much impact their innovations had, not just on their own time, but on the development of, well, Western civilization as a whole.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the impact of their engineering marvels. The aqueducts. These incredible feats of engineering that brought fresh water to their cities, some of those aqueducts are still standing today.
It's crazy.
They were not just practical, but they were symbols of Roman ingenuity and power.
It really is mind-boggling when you think about it. We're sitting here centuries later, and we're still marveling at what they accomplished. They truly left their mark on the world. But before we wrap up our little Roman adventure here, I wanted to give a shout out to those unsung heroes of the Roman military. I'm talking about the everyday soldiers, the guys on the ground marching for, like, what was it, 30 kilometers?
40 kilometers 3 times a month.
3 times a month, carrying all that gear.
It was grueling.
That takes some serious dedication.
The life of a Roman soldier was definitely not for the faint of heart. Their training was brutal, designed to mold them into this cohesive fighting force capable of enduring incredible hardships. And their equipment, while effective, was definitely no walk in the park to carry around.
Yeah, no kidding. But hey, at least they got a pretty sweet deal after their 20-plus years of service, a plot of land. Talk about a retirement plan.
It was a pretty good incentive to make it through those campaigns. And it speaks to the importance Rome placed on maintaining a strong and loyal military.
That makes sense.
A stable empire needed seasoned veterans, not just to conquer, but to maintain peace and order throughout those vast territories.
Right, you got to protect what you conquer. So as we wrap things up here, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into ancient Rome?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Rome, it wasn't just about the togas and the gladiators and the grandeur that we so often see in movies. It was a society of incredible complexity and contrast. On the one hand, you had this incredible power and wealth, the grandeur of the Colosseum, the might of their army, but on the other, you had the everyday lives of people just like us, trying to make a living, raise families, and find moments of joy in a world that wasn't always kind or easy.
It's a good reminder that even though they lived thousands of years ago, they weren't all that different from us.
Exactly. They had their loves, their losses, their triumphs, their struggles. They were human, just like us.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our Roman holiday.
I've enjoyed it.
Me too. But before we go, deep divers, here's a little food for thought. If you could travel back in time to ancient Rome, what role do you think you'd play in their society? A senator, a merchant, a charioteer, maybe even a bather armed with your trusty strigil. Let us know what you think. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.